The Station That Never Closes, Episode 1. The last train, 11:47 p.m., the final ride home. Ryan Carter hated late shifts. By the time he left work, the streets were nearly empty, and the only thing between him and his bed was one last subway ride. The station was quiet. Too quiet. A few scattered commuters stood in silence, faces illuminated by the dull glow of their phones. The digital board overhead flickered. Metro last train, arriving 11:50 p.m. Ryan sighed in relief. One more stop. Just one more, and he'd be home. The distant hum of the train rumbled through the tunnel. He felt it before he saw it, the familiar rush of wind, the vibration beneath his feet. Then, with a screech, the subway pulled into the station. The doors slid open. No one exited. 11:50 p.m., the empty train. Ryan hesitated. Usually, at this hour, a few tired souls would be stumbling off. But the train was empty. Not a single passenger inside. Odd. He glanced at the platform. The few people waiting around him didn't move. No one else stepped forward. No one even acknowledged the train had arrived. The doors beeped. A soft automated voice announced, "Mind the closing doors." Ryan stepped inside just as the doors slammed shut behind him. 11:51 p.m., the silence that followed the train hummed to life, smoothly pulling away from the station. Ryan exhaled and chose a seat near the middle of the car. Rows of empty seats stretched before him. No litter. No graffiti. Too clean. Something about the silence felt off. He checked his phone. No service. Typical for underground. His eyes flicked up to the digital screen near the ceiling, waiting for the familiar update on the next stop. The screen was blank. Ryan frowned. That wasn't normal. 11:53 p.m., the first sign something was wrong. He leaned back, watching the dark tunnel rush past. It felt longer than usual. A few more seconds passed. Then a minute. No station. Ryan sat up straight. The train had been moving for too long without stopping. His heart quickened. Maybe there was a delay? Maybe the station announcement system was broken? The intercom crackled. Ryan's stomach twisted as a distorted voice whispered through the speakers, "Ryan Carter, this is your stop." 11:54 p.m., the station that didn't change. His blood ran cold. His name. The announcement had said his name. The train lurched to a stop. The doors slid open. Ryan scrambled to his feet and looked outside. His jaw tightened. It was the same station he had just left. The same cracked tiles. The same dull lighting. Even the same people were still standing there, frozen in place. It was impossible. He hadn't moved at all. And yet, he had never seen the train turn around. The doors remained open, waiting. The commuters didn't react. They didn't move. Didn't blink. Something told Ryan not to step out. Then, slowly one of the commuters turned his head. Not like a normal motion. Too slow. Too unnatural. Ryan felt a weight press against his chest. Run. The train doors beeped. The man on the platform locked eyes with him. And smiled. The doors slammed shut. 11:55 p.m., the second attempt. The train jolted forward. Ryan's breath came in uneven gasps. Had he imagined that? He pressed his hands against his face. Stay calm. Maybe the train was malfunctioning? He'd get off at the next stop. If there was a next stop. He glanced at the screen overhead. This time, it wasn't blank. A message flickered across it, "Stay on the train." Ryan's hands went numb. 11:57 p.m., the reflection that moved first. The train windows reflected his own pale face back at him. He took deep breaths. Think rationally. Maybe someone was playing a sick joke. Maybe he was just exhausted. Then his reflection blinked. He hadn't. His muscles tensed. His reflection grinned. Ryan's entire body went rigid. Then the reflection lifted a hand and waved. Ryan didn't move. But his reflection did. His stomach flipped. His pulse pounded. Then, without warning, the train slammed to a stop. The door slid open again. And Ryan saw something outside that shouldn't be there. 11:58 p.m., the wrong version of him. He should have been relieved. The train had stopped. The station outside was different. But something was wrong. Someone was standing on the platform. Him. A perfect copy of Ryan Carter. The doppelganger stepped forward. Ryan stumbled backward. The figure tilted its head. It's time to switch. Ryan shook his head violently. No. No, the train doors beeped again. A choice. Ryan had to choose. Stay on the train. Or step outside. The doors started closing. The other Ryan smiled. And then the lights flickered. The train pulled away. The doppelganger remained standing on the platform, watching him leave. Ryan collapsed into his seat. He hadn't left. And somehow that had been the right choice. But the train kept going. No end in sight. No destination. Only the voice whispering in his head, "Next time, you won't be so lucky." The station that never closes, Episode 2. The announcements that know my name. 12:01 a.m. The train moves on. Ryan sat motionless, his heart hammering against his ribs. He should have gotten off. Or maybe he shouldn't have. The decision still rattled in his brain. His own copy had been standing on the platform, waiting, expecting him to step out. He had stayed. And now, the train kept moving. But where? And for how long? The screen above him flickered. A single phrase appeared, "You made the right choice." 12:03 a.m., the empty seats aren't empty. Ryan exhaled, trying to steady himself. He was alone. Completely alone. Wasn't he? His hands clenched against the seat. Then he noticed something. The seats around him weren't as empty as they had been. Shapes. Faint. Shadow-like. People. Or something else. They sat perfectly still. Ryan blinked. When his eyes opened again, the shadows were closer. 12:05 a.m., the voice in the speakers. The train intercom crackled. Ryan tensed, expecting another strange announcement. But the voice wasn't distorted this time. It was his own. "Ryan Carter, remain seated. You must not move." Ryan's breath stilled. He looked up at the speakers. The voice echoed again, "Do not leave your seat. Do not acknowledge the others." He swallowed hard. The others. He felt a presence behind him. The air shifted. Something breathed. Ryan clenched his fists. He wasn't alone anymore. 12:07 a.m., the wrong reflection. The train's windows reflected his own pale face. He stared at himself, at the empty rows behind him. Then his blood went cold. There was something sitting behind him. A silhouette. Tall. Still. He couldn't turn around. He wouldn't. Then his reflection smiled. Ryan hadn't moved. But his reflection had. 12:09 a.m., the doors open again. The train screeched to a stop. Ryan's body tensed. "This is your stop, Ryan." 12:10 a.m., the passengers that shouldn't exist. Ryan forced himself to look away from the platform. Then he froze. He wasn't alone anymore. Rows of passengers sat in the seats now. They had no faces. Just dark, hollow spaces where their eyes and mouths should have been. Ryan's pulse roared in his ears. They were watching him. Or sensing him. The intercom crackled again. His own voice whispered, "Do not acknowledge them." 12:12 a.m., the choice. Ryan's fingers dug into the seat. The doors stayed open. The silent figures on the platform waited. The faceless passengers inside waited. The train was giving him a choice. Stay. Or step out. His own voice had told him to stay. But why? And who was speaking to him? Ryan swallowed hard. He had 1 minute to decide. 12:13 a.m., the closing doors. The figures on the platform tilted their heads. The faceless passengers stretched their hands toward him. Ryan clenched his jaw. He wasn't leaving. Not until he understood. The train doors slammed shut. The intercom whispered, "Good choice, Ryan. But next time, you might not be so lucky." The train pulled away. And the empty sockets where faces should have been smiled. The station that never closes, Episode 3. The passengers that aren't human. 12:14 a.m., the train that won't stop. Ryan gripped the armrests of his seat, his breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. The doors had shut. He had chosen to stay. The faceless passengers remained perfectly still, their hollow sockets trained on him, their twisted grins stretching too wide for comfort. The train hummed forward, its rhythmic motion doing nothing to calm his nerves. The intercom crackled. "Remain seated, Ryan." His own voice. Again. Ryan's knuckles turned white. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but he already knew, the train wasn't going to answer him. Not yet. 12:16 a.m., the sound that wasn't there before. Something changed. The steady hum of the train wasn't alone anymore. A sound wet, unnatural whispered through the car. A faint, slithering noise. Ryan's stomach twisted. The faceless passengers hadn't moved. But something else had. Somewhere behind him. The whisper in the intercom returned, "Do not look back." Ryan's jaw clenched. It was getting closer. 12:18 a.m., the reflection in the glass. The windows offered nothing but darkness outside. But as Ryan cautiously shifted his gaze, something inside the glass caught his eye. A blurred figure, tall, hunched, standing behind his seat. Watching. Ryan's pulse pounded. He fought every urge to whip around, to confirm what he already knew. The thing was breathing. He felt the warmth against his neck. A quiet, guttural clicking sound. His chest tightened as the intercom hissed again, "Do not acknowledge it." Ryan clenched his jaw. Then the thing spoke. 12:20 a.m., the voice that shouldn't exist. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was his own. Warped. Distorted. Like someone had taken his words and twisted them into something else. Ryan's fingers dug into his knees. "Do not respond. Do not react." The thing behind him exhaled. Then something sharp grazed his shoulder. Not claws. Not fingers. Something with teeth. Ryan's body locked up. "You shouldn't be here," it repeated. 12:21 a.m., the passengers start moving. A sudden jolt shook the train. Ryan flinched. The thing behind him hissed and recoiled into the shadows. But the faceless passengers. They were moving now. Heads turning. Limbs twitching. A slow, unnatural rhythm, like puppets being adjusted by unseen strings. The intercom crackled, "Stand up, Ryan." Ryan's breath caught in his throat. It had told him not to move before. But now something had changed. 12:23 a.m., the wrong passengers. Ryan rose from his seat, legs trembling. The passengers weren't just moving. They were becoming people he knew. His old math teacher. His childhood best friend. A girl he had dated years ago. Their empty faces morphed, molding into familiar features, except their eyes remained hollow. Ryan's stomach dropped. None of them should be here. Some of them weren't even alive anymore. 12:25 a.m., the thing that spoke again. Ryan. The voice came from behind him. But he already knew who it was. Ryan turned, and there he was. A perfect copy of himself. But the eyes weren't right. Too dark. Too hollow. Too hungry. Time to switch places. The thing grinned. And stepped closer. 12:26 a.m., the only way out. The passengers closed in. Ryan's double stretched out a hand. If he touched it, it would take his place. He would be one of them. Just another passenger. Trapped. The train slowed. The intercom crackled one last time. Ryan. Run. And so he did. 12:27 a.m., the doors that shouldn't open the train shuddered violently. The lights flickered. Ryan lunged toward the nearest doors. They weren't supposed to open yet. But as he reached out, they slid apart. And outside he saw something new. Not the same station. Not the same platform. A place he recognized. His apartment. 12:28 a.m., the final decision. The copy of himself snarled. You don't get to leave. The faceless passengers lurched forward. Ryan had seconds to decide. Stay. Or leap into the unknown. He jumped. And the train doors slammed shut behind him. 12:29 a.m., the wrong version of home. Ryan landed hard on the pavement outside his apartment building. His heart hammered. The subway train was gone. The night was silent. Too silent. Then a whisper from behind him, you made it home, Ryan. Ryan turned. And his blood ran cold. Because the voice had come from inside his apartment. The station that never closes, episode 4. The apartment that isn't mine. 12:30 a.m., the return home. Ryan stood frozen outside his apartment building. His breath misted in the cold air. His pulse thundered in his ears. The train was gone. He should have been relieved. But something was wrong. Because the whisper had come from inside his apartment. A voice that sounded like his own. You made it home, Ryan. 12:31 a.m., the key that didn't fit. Ryan's fingers trembled as he pulled his keys from his pocket. He slid the key into the lock. It didn't fit. He frowned, trying again. Still nothing. The door was locked from the inside. A chill ran down his spine. His own voice spoke from behind the door. Are you going to stand there all night? 12:32 a.m., the door opens itself. The lock clicked. The door creaked open. Ryan stepped back on instinct, his breath caught in his throat. The apartment beyond was his, but not. Everything was in its place but slightly wrong. The couch wasn't the right color. The pictures on the wall were of people he didn't recognize. The smell was off. Like the scent of a place that had been lived in for years. But not by him. 12:33 a.m., the TV that played without a remote. Ryan stepped inside cautiously. The door clicked shut behind him. The TV was on, even though he hadn't touched it. The screen flickered. At first, just static. Then a video feed. A live feed. Of himself. Standing in the middle of his own living room. Ryan's stomach dropped. The screen glitched. His reflection in the TV moved its lips. You're not supposed to be here. 12:35 a.m., the other version of himself. Ryan's knees nearly buckled. The figure in the screen wasn't just copying him. It was speaking on its own. The lights in the apartment flickered. Something moved in the hallway. A shadow stretched along the wall. Ryan turned and his breath caught in his throat. Someone was standing at the end of the hallway. Someone who looked exactly like him. 12:37 a.m., the wrong version of Ryan. The other Ryan stepped forward. Slow. Measured. His face was identical. But his eyes were wrong. Too dark. Too deep. Like he wasn't looking at Ryan but through him. The TV flickered again. Ryan turned back to the screen. The version of him inside the TV shook its head. Run. 12:38 a.m., the chase. Ryan turned back to the hallway, but his double was already moving. Too fast. Too unnatural. Ryan's instincts screamed at him. He bolted. Through the living room. Toward the door. The lights cut out completely. Darkness swallowed the apartment whole. Then a breath against his ear. Where do you think you're going? 12:40 a.m., the door that wouldn't open. Ryan grabbed the doorknob. Twisted. Pulled. It wouldn't budge. His reflection in the TV watched him. The other Ryan was right behind him. This is my home now. 12:41 a.m., the fight for control. Ryan spun around just as his double lunged. They crashed into the floor. Pain shot through his ribs. Hands wrapped around his throat. The other Ryan was smiling. His voice was a whisper. Go back to the train, Ryan. Ryan's vision blurred. The weight on his chest pressed harder. Then a voice from the TV. His own voice, urgent, get to the mirror. 12:42 a.m., the mirror as a door. Ryan's fingers found a broken glass shard from the table. He swung the glass, slashed across his double's arm. The thing hissed and recoiled. Ryan scrambled to his feet. The only source of light was the bathroom door, and inside, the mirror. His reflection was waiting. Arms stretched wide. Like a door. A way out. The other Ryan lunged again. Ryan dove into the mirror. And everything collapsed into darkness. 12:43 a.m., the station returns. Ryan hit the ground hard. Cold tile. Stale air. He gasped for breath. Blinking, he looked up. The subway platform stretched before him. The lights flickered. A train rumbled into the station. The doors slid open. And inside, the seats were empty. Waiting. Ryan's hands shook. He was back. Back where it all started. The intercom crackled overhead. His own voice whispered, all aboard. The station that never closes, Episode 5. The Man Who Knows My Name. 12:45 a.m., the station again. Ryan gasped for air. His hands pressed against the cold tile of the subway platform. His lungs burned. His heart pounded in his chest. He was back. The same station. The same flickering lights. The same feeling that something was very, very wrong. The intercom overhead crackled to life. A familiar voice whispered, welcome back, Ryan. His own voice. 12:46 a.m., the empty platform isn't empty. Ryan's fingers clenched into fists as he forced himself to stand. The platform looked abandoned. But it wasn't. Not really. He could feel something watching him. The air was thick, electric, as if the station itself was holding its breath. Ryan turned his head slowly. A figure stood at the far end of the platform. A man. Still. Silent. And watching him. 12:48 a.m., the man who knows me. Ryan's pulse thundered. The man was dressed in a long, dark coat. His hands tucked neatly in his pockets. His face was hidden in the shadows. But Ryan could feel his eyes. The man tilted his head slightly. And then, in a voice Ryan had never heard before, he spoke, "You're not supposed to be here, Ryan." Ryan's mouth went dry. "Who are you?" The man smiled. "I've been waiting for you." 12:50 a.m., the first question. Ryan took a cautious step forward. His instincts screamed at him to run. But there was nowhere to go. The train he had left behind was gone. The platform stretched endlessly in both directions, swallowed by shadows. Ryan swallowed. "What is this place?" The man let out a soft chuckle. "A mistake." Ryan frowned. "I don't understand." The man stepped forward. "I know." 12:52 a.m., the train that never left. Ryan glanced toward the tracks. The rails hummed faintly, as if a train was coming. Or had never really left. The man followed his gaze and sighed. "You took the wrong train, Ryan." Ryan's stomach twisted. He clenched his fists. What does that mean? The man's smile didn't waver. It means you were never supposed to get on. Ryan felt a wave of cold dread. The lights above flickered. For a split second, the man's shadow stretched unnaturally long across the floor. Ryan took a step back. Then why am I here? The man's expression darkened. Because something wants you to be. 12:55 a.m., the whispering walls, a soft sound filled the air. A whisper. Not from the man. Not from Ryan. From the walls of the station. Low. Insistent. Growing louder. Ryan's blood ran cold. The walls were moving. Shifting, like breathing skin. The man in the coat sighed. You don't have much time. Ryan's heart pounded. For what? The man reached into his pocket. Pulled out a ticket. And held it out. To leave. 12:57 a.m., the ticket to nowhere. Ryan hesitated. The ticket was old, yellowed with age. There was no destination printed on it. Only a single word, return. Ryan looked up. Where does this take me? The man's face was unreadable. Home. Ryan's fingers twitched. The whispers grew louder. The station lights dimmed. He could feel something coming. Something hungry. 12:59 a.m., the final warning. The man stepped closer. His voice was quiet, urgent. Take it, Ryan. This is your last chance. Ryan's chest tightened. A shadow slithered along the walls. Dark. Twisting. Crawling toward them. The train tracks began to shake. Ryan grabbed the ticket, and the moment his fingers touched it, the station collapsed into darkness. 1 a.m., the choice. Ryan opened his eyes. He was on the train. Seated. Hands clenched around the ticket. The train doors were open. Outside was a station he didn't recognize. His own voice whispered over the intercom, Ryan. This is your stop. Ryan's heart pounded. The man in the coat was gone. The faceless passengers remained still. Waiting. Ryan exhaled slowly. And then he stood. Stepped toward the doors. And chose. The station that never closes, Episode 6. The stop that shouldn't exist. 1:01 a.m., the unknown station. Ryan stood frozen at the train doors, the yellowed ticket clenched in his trembling hands. The intercom crackled overhead, his own distorted voice whispering, Ryan. This is your stop. The station outside wasn't like the others. It was too clean. Too quiet. No graffiti. No flickering lights. The air smelled sterile, as if it had never been touched by time. A single sign hung above the empty platform, Metro Final Destination. Ryan's breath hitched. What does that mean? 1:02 a.m., the choice. The train doors remained open. The faceless passengers sat motionless. Waiting. Ryan looked back at the ticket. Return. Return where? He took a deep breath. And then he stepped off the train. 1:03 a.m., the platform that felt wrong. The second his foot touched the platform, a shiver ran up his spine. The air here wasn't normal. It was thick. Heavy. Like it was pressing against his skin, trying to seep inside. Behind him, the train doors remained open. Waiting. Inviting. Ryan took another step forward. Then the train lurched violently. The lights inside flickered. The faceless passengers turned their heads in unison. Ryan's chest tightened. Something was about to happen. 1:05 a.m., the voice in the station. A whisper slithered through the air. Soft. Familiar. Ryan. He spun around. The platform was empty. But the voice. It had come from the ticket booth. A shadow flickered behind the glass. A silhouette watching him. Ryan's hands curled into fists. Who's there? The intercom buzzed overhead. The same voice spoke again, "Come closer." 1:07 a.m., the man in the ticket booth. Ryan hesitated. Then slowly, he stepped toward the booth. The figure inside was just a shadow. Undefined. Shifting like static. Then the lights flickered. And suddenly, Ryan was staring at himself. His own reflection, but different. The eyes were wrong. The smile was too wide. The voice that came out wasn't his. "You took the wrong ticket, Ryan." 1:09 a.m., the question that shouldn't be asked. Ryan's pulse hammered. His doppelganger pressed a hand against the glass. "Do you want to go home?" Ryan swallowed hard. "Yes." The reflection's smile widened. "Then trade places with me." Ryan's breath hitched. "What?" The glass between them rippled like water. His reflection lifted a second ticket. It looked identical to the one Ryan held except for one small difference. Instead of return, it said stay. 1:11 a.m., the reflection that moved first. Ryan's fingers curled around his ticket. He took a slow step back. His reflection mimicked the movement. But then the reflection grinned. And lifted its left hand. Ryan had lifted his right. They were no longer the same. His stomach twisted. "This isn't me." The figure in the glass pressed closer. Its lips parted, revealing teeth that were too sharp. "Trade tickets, Ryan. It's the only way out." 1:13 a.m., the wrong ticket. Ryan's breath came in ragged gasps. He looked down at his ticket. "Return." The reflection's voice slithered through the air. "You don't know where that takes you." Ryan hesitated. His fingers itched to reach for the other ticket. The whispers in the station grew louder. The glass bulged outward. A hand, his own hand, but not, broke through. Reaching for him. 1:15 a.m., the escape. Ryan staggered back. His reflection clawed toward him. The intercom crackled again. His own voice whispered urgently, "Run." Ryan turned and sprinted toward the train. The station shuddered. The floor buckled beneath his feet. Behind him, the reflection screamed. The train doors were closing. Ryan lunged forward, and just as the doors slammed shut, he caught a final glimpse of the station. It was disappearing. Like it had never existed at all. 1:17 a.m., the final announcement. Ryan collapsed into a seat, chest heaving. The train lurched forward. The lights flickered. A new station was coming. The intercom crackled overhead. His own voice spoke once more, "Next stop, home." But this time, Ryan wasn't sure if it was telling the truth. The station that never closes, Episode 7, The Passenger Who Knows Me. 1:18 a.m., the train moves again. Ryan sat slumped against the cold metal of the train car, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had barely made it. The doors had shut just in time, sealing him inside and erasing that station from existence. But something wasn't right. The train was moving too smoothly. No rattling. No screeching of metal against tracks. Just silence. Too much silence. Ryan's skin prickled. He wasn't alone. 1:20 a.m., the passenger in the corner. Ryan forced himself to sit up, scanning the car. It was empty. At least, at first glance. Then his eyes landed on the farthest corner. A figure sat there, cloaked in shadow. A passenger. Ryan swallowed hard. The train had been empty when he boarded. Hadn't it? 1:22 a.m., the wrong kind of stillness. The passenger didn't move. Not a twitch. Not a shift. Not even the faintest rise and fall of breathing. Ryan's fingers tightened around his seat. "Excuse me." The passenger didn't respond. Didn't even react. Ryan's pulse pounded. He should have ignored it. But he didn't. Instead he stood up. And stepped forward. 1:24 a.m., the face that shouldn't be there. Ryan took another hesitant step closer. The passenger was slouched forward, their hood pulled low over their face. But something about their posture was wrong. Too stiff. Too unnatural. Ryan reached out and gently nudged the figure's shoulder. Slowly the passenger tilted their head up. Ryan's stomach dropped. There was no face. Just smooth, pale skin. 1:26 a.m., the voice that knows too much. Ryan staggered backward, bile rising in his throat. The faceless passenger remained motionless. Then it spoke. In his own voice. You shouldn't have come back. Ryan's vision blurred. The train lights flickered. This isn't real. This isn't real. But then the faceless passenger lifted a hand and pointed at the seat next to them. Sit down, Ryan. 1:28 a.m., the command that shouldn't be obeyed. Ryan's legs felt heavy. The air inside the train had thickened, pressing against his skin, against his thoughts. A force he couldn't fight. His body moved on its own. One step. Then another. Until he was standing beside the faceless thing. Then he sat down. 1:30 a.m., the whisper in his ear. The faceless passenger turned toward him. Though there were no eyes, no mouth, Ryan could feel it watching. Then it whispered. Soft. Close. Do you remember how this ends? Ryan's breath hitched. A memory stirred in the back of his mind. A memory he didn't recognize. 1:32 a.m., the flashback that wasn't his. Ryan's vision darkened. The train disappeared. He was standing on a subway platform. Alone. No trains. No movement. Just a sign above his head that read, Metro Final Destination. Ryan's hands clenched. This isn't real. But his own voice whispered back, it already happened. 1:34 a.m., the truth that unraveled. The faceless passenger's voice slithered into his ears. You never left, Ryan. Ryan's pulse roared. His vision cleared. He was back on the train. But the world felt different. Because now, he remembered. He remembered what he had forgotten. The first time he had taken this train. The first time he had been trapped. The first time he had died. 1:36 a.m., the passenger that shouldn't exist. Ryan turned toward the faceless passenger. Who are you? The figure's smooth skin shifted. Mouthless. Eyeless. Yet it smiled. Then the train screeched to a halt. The door slid open. And for the first time Ryan saw what waited outside. 1:38 a.m., the stop that wasn't real. The station beyond the doors wasn't a station. It was a void. A swirling abyss of shadows and whispers. A place Ryan knew. Because he had been there before. Because he had never really left. The faceless passenger's voice was almost gentle now. It's time to wake up, Ryan. Ryan's body froze. What? The thing tilted its head. And then it whispered, you've been dreaming. 1:40 a.m., the choice that changed everything. Ryan looked down at his hands. They were fading. His body was unraveling, dissolving into the air. He wasn't real. The train had never been real. None of it. And yet the faceless passenger held out one last ticket. Ryan's hands trembled. The intercom crackled overhead. His own voice whispered, last stop, Ryan. Ryan looked at the ticket. A single word was printed on it, wake up. And then the train doors slammed shut. The station that never closes, episode 8. The ticket to wake up. 1:41 a.m., the ticket that shouldn't exist. Ryan's fingers trembled as he stared at the ticket. A single word was printed on it, wake up. The faceless passenger remained still beside him, waiting. The intercom crackled. His own distorted voice whispered, this is your last chance, Ryan. Ryan swallowed hard. Everything inside him screamed not to trust it. But what other choice did he have? He reached for the ticket. 1:42 a.m., the train's warning. The second his fingers touched the ticket, the train shuddered violently. The lights flickered wildly, casting elongated shadows against the metal walls. The faceless passenger twitched. The intercom hissed. "Do not take the ticket." Ryan froze. His heart pounded. What? The voice inside the intercom wasn't his anymore. It was something else. Something angry. Something terrified. The walls of the train began to bend. Like the entire car was breathing. The faceless passenger remained motionless. Waiting. 1:44 a.m., the reflection that didn't match Ryan glanced at the train windows. His own reflection stared back. Then it moved. Ryan hadn't. His reflection slowly raised its hand. And pressed its palm against the glass. Ryan's breath hitched. It was mouthing something. A single phrase, "Don't wake up." 1:45 a.m., the rift between realities. The train lurched again. Ryan gritted his teeth, gripping the seat for balance. The air shifted. The world outside the windows distorted, twisting into a tunnel of endless black voids. This wasn't reality. It never had been. The faceless passenger finally spoke, "You don't belong here." Ryan's pulse roared. "Then why am I here?" The passenger's smooth, blank face tilted slightly. "Because you chose to stay." 1:47 a.m., the truth that burns. Ryan clenched his fists. "That's not possible." The intercom buzzed, interrupting him. A new voice echoed through the train. One he hadn't heard before. One that was not his. "Ryan Carter. You are waking up." The train began to collapse. The seats crumpled like paper. The walls peeled away, revealing nothing but endless dark beyond. Ryan's chest tightened. "What's happening?" The faceless passenger turned toward him. "You have to choose, Ryan." Ryan's fingers tightened around the ticket. His vision blurred. His mind ached. And then he remembered. 1:49 a.m., the memory he had forgotten. The train was gone. Ryan stood in a hospital room. A monitor beeped softly beside him. The air smelled of antiseptic and something old. Something forgotten. He turned slowly. A hospital bed stood in the center of the room. And lying in it was himself. 1:50 a.m., the man in the bed. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. His own face stared back at him, pale and lifeless, tubes attached to his arms. The heart monitor beeped steadily. This was real. This was the truth. He had never left. He had been in a coma. The train. The endless stations. The voices whispering his name. None of it was real. It was all his mind trying to wake up. And now, he had to make a choice. 1:52 a.m., the final decision. Ryan felt a presence behind him. The faceless passenger. Still there. Still waiting. "You can go back," it whispered. "Or you can wake up." Ryan turned toward his hospital bed. His own body looked fragile, like something that had been left behind for too long. He took a shaky breath. His fingers tightened around the ticket. And then he tore it in half. 1:54 a.m., the world collapses. A shockwave tore through the air. The hospital room shattered like glass. Ryan fell. Fell into nothingness. The intercom voice screamed, "You weren't supposed to wake up." Ryan's vision blurred. His ears rang. And then everything went white. 1:56 a.m., waking up. A gasp. Air rushed into his lungs. Ryan's eyes snapped open. Blinding hospital lights seared his vision. Machines beeped wildly. A nurse's voice shouted for a doctor. Ryan was awake. For the first time in a long, long time. But something wasn't right. He turned his head slightly. And in the dark corner of the hospital room a faceless figure sat perfectly still. Watching him. Waiting. The station that never closes, Episode 9. The passenger who followed me. 1:57 a.m., the hospital room. Ryan's chest rose and fell rapidly. He was awake. For the first time in what felt like forever. The sterile hospital air burned his lungs. Machines beeped wildly beside him, their rhythm erratic, like they too couldn't believe he was alive. But something was wrong. Because in the farthest corner of the room a shadow sat perfectly still. Watching. Waiting. The faceless passenger had followed him. 1:58 a.m., the first movement Ryan's body refused to move. His fingers trembled against the hospital sheets. His heart pounded, his breath shallow. The figure in the corner remained still. Too still. Then it moved. A slight tilt of the head. Acknowledging him. Ryan's throat went dry. This isn't possible. He had woken up. Hadn't he? 2 a.m., the nurse who didn't see a sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. A nurse hurried inside, eyes wide with disbelief. My God. Mr. Carter? You're awake. Ryan opened his mouth to speak. But no words came out. He glanced toward the corner. The shadow was gone. Like it had never been there at all. The nurse checked his vitals, shaking her head. You've been in a coma for over 6 months. This is miraculous. Ryan barely heard her. His mind was racing. If he had been unconscious for that long, then where had he been? And why did it feel like something had come back with him? 2:03 a.m., the unfamiliar reflection later that night, after the doctors had run their tests and left him alone, Ryan stared at his reflection in the small bathroom mirror. His face looked pale, thinner than he remembered. His eyes. Something was off. The pupils were darker. Deeper. Like something else was looking through them. A chill crawled up his spine. He turned away and his reflection didn't move. 2:05 a.m., the whisper Ryan's breath hitched. His own reflection stood still, lips slightly parted, as if frozen mid-thought. Then it moved. A fraction of a second too late. A fraction of a second too wrong. Then, in a voice just barely above a whisper, it spoke, "You never left." Ryan staggered back. The room felt smaller. Tighter. Like the walls were pressing in, suffocating him. This isn't real. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure if he believed it. 2:07 a.m., the darkened hallway. A sudden knock on his door startled him. Ryan turned sharply, chest heaving. Silence. The hallway beyond was dark. Too dark. He stepped out, barefoot against the cold hospital tiles. The halls stretched longer than they should have. The overhead lights flickered, humming softly. Then a figure appeared at the far end. Standing just at the edge of the darkness. Ryan's stomach twisted. It was him. Or something wearing his shape. 2:09 a.m., the doppelganger. The figure tilted its head. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, it lifted a hand and waved. Ryan's body locked up. His own voice whispered from the other end of the hall, "You shouldn't have woken up." Ryan turned and ran. 2:11 a.m., the wrong room. Ryan sprinted down the hallway, his bare feet slapping against the tile. The halls were endless. Every door he passed had no numbers. No signs. Just empty, sterile walls. Then he reached a door that was already slightly open. Light spilled out from inside. He didn't think. He pushed it open. And his breath stopped. 2:12 a.m., the room that shouldn't exist inside the room was the train. The seats. The metal walls. The flickering overhead lights. It was waiting for him. The intercom crackled. Ryan's stomach twisted as his own voice whispered, "Last stop, Ryan." The doors of the train slid open. And inside a single passenger was waiting. The faceless man. Sitting in the same seat he always had. Ryan stepped back. This isn't real. This isn't real. The faceless man slowly stood up. Then, in a voice that rattled through the walls, he spoke, "It's time to go home." 2:15 a.m., the final question. Ryan's entire body screamed at him to run. To leave. To never look back. But a question slipped past his lips before he could stop himself: what if I never woke up? The faceless passenger tilted his head. Then he took a single step forward. "Then why do you still hear the train, Ryan?" Ryan's blood ran cold. Because now that he listened, he did hear it. The distant rumble of wheels against the track. The hum of the intercom, waiting to announce the next stop. The soft beeping of hospital monitors. His pulse pounded. Because suddenly he wasn't sure which one was real anymore. 2:16 a.m., the decision that will change everything. The train doors remained open. The hallway behind him stretched endlessly. Ryan's heart pounded. He had one choice. Step onto the train. Or walk away. The faceless passenger lifted a hand, gesturing toward the seat beside him. Ryan clenched his fists. And then he stepped forward. Not toward the train, but toward the hallway. And as he walked, the train door slammed shut behind him. The last thing he heard was his own voice whispering, "You made the wrong choice, Ryan." The station that never closes, Episode 10. The door that shouldn't be open. 2:17 a.m., the wrong hallway. Ryan ran. His bare feet slapped against the cold hospital floor, his breath ragged, his mind screaming at him to wake up. But wasn't he already awake? The train was gone. The faceless passenger was gone. Yet the words still echoed in his mind, "You made the wrong choice, Ryan." The hospital hallway stretched endlessly before him, the flickering fluorescent lights casting long, unnatural shadows. Something was following him. He could feel it. 2:19 a.m., the whisper in the dark. A whisper slithered through the air behind him. Soft. Familiar. Ryan. His chest tightened. He didn't turn around. He couldn't. The hospital was wrong. The halls were too long. The walls breathed. The doors had no numbers. Ryan clenched his fists. This isn't real. But the whisper came again. Closer now. You should have taken the train. 2:21 a.m., the door that shouldn't be open. A door stood ajar to his right. Warm, flickering light spilled out from inside. Ryan skidded to a halt, chest heaving. The whispers grew louder. From inside the room. Something was waiting for him. His fingers trembled as he pushed the door open and his breath caught. 2:23 a.m., the room that shouldn't exist inside wasn't a hospital room. It was a train car. His train car. The seats. The metal walls. The flickering overhead lights. It was waiting for him. His heart pounded. This isn't possible. He had left this place. Hadn't he? The intercom crackled. And then his own voice whispered, "You still have a ticket, Ryan." 2:25 a.m., the reflection that moved first. Ryan took a step back. The train felt alive. Like it was breathing, waiting, expecting. The doors remained open. He turned his head slightly. And caught his reflection in the window. But it wasn't him. Not exactly. His reflection stared back, lips curled into a knowing smile. Ryan wasn't smiling. The reflection raised a hand. And placed it against the glass. Ryan's blood ran cold. His reflection's lips moved. You have to go back. 2:27 a.m., the passenger who never left a shadow stirred in the farthest seat of the train. Ryan's stomach twisted. The faceless passenger was still there. It hadn't left. It had never left. It sat perfectly still. Then it turned its head. Slowly. Deliberately. And spoke. You don't belong here, Ryan. Ryan's breath hitched. He wasn't sure if it was talking about the train or the hospital. 2:30 a.m., the choice that wasn't a choice. The intercom crackled overhead. His own voice whispered, Ryan. It's time. The train rumbled. The lights flickered. The doors remained open. The hospital was silent behind him. The train was waiting in front of him. Ryan swallowed hard. He had one choice. One final choice. Stay. Or step onto the train. His fingers twitched. His pulse thundered in his ears. Then he stepped forward. And onto the train. The doors slammed shut. 2:32 a.m., the train moves again. The hospital disappeared. The walls of the train shuddered. The faceless passenger remained still. Watching. Waiting. Ryan collapsed into a seat. His body felt heavy. Like he had just done exactly what he was always supposed to do. The intercom buzzed again. A different voice this time. Not his own. Not the passengers. Something else. Welcome back, Ryan. 2:34 a.m., the destination that wasn't home. The train moved faster now. Faster than before. The windows showed nothing but darkness. Endless. Infinite. The intercom crackled. Next stop, home. Ryan's fingers dug into the seat. The faceless passenger shifted slightly. Ryan swallowed. His mouth was dry. What if I don't want to go home? The faceless passenger turned its head. And for the first time it smiled. Then you shouldn't have come back. 2:36 a.m., the realization. The train slowed. The doors hissed open. Ryan's breath caught. Because the station outside wasn't his home. It wasn't even a station. It was something else. Something old. Something hungry. And it had been waiting for him. For a long, long time. The faceless passenger stood up. The intercom crackled. This is your stop, Ryan. Ryan's stomach twisted. The air tasted wrong. He looked toward the faceless passenger one last time. And then he stepped off the train. The station that never closes, episode 11. The home that wasn't mine. 2:37 a.m., the place that called itself home. Ryan stepped off the train. His breath misted in the cold air. The scent of damp earth and something metallic clung to the atmosphere. The train doors hissed shut behind him. And then, without a sound, the train vanished. Not rolled away. Not disappeared into the distance. Just gone. Ryan swallowed hard. He turned slowly, taking in his surroundings. And his stomach dropped. Because he knew this place. Or at least, it wanted him to think he did. 2:39 a.m., the street that looked familiar. Ryan stood in the middle of a deserted street. The buildings looked almost right. The cracked sidewalk, the street lights flickering overhead, the old diner on the corner where he used to get coffee. But something was wrong. The signs were blank. The windows of the buildings reflected nothing. There were no cars. No people. No sound. Just a distant, low hum, vibrating through the air like the world itself was breathing. Ryan's hands clenched into fists. This isn't home. So why did it feel like it was? 2:41 a.m., the house that shouldn't exist. He walked forward, his steps slow, cautious. His childhood home stood at the end of the street. Perfectly intact. Untouched by time. Ryan's pulse thundered. He hadn't lived there in years. Hadn't seen it since his parents died. So why was it here? And why was the front door already open? 2:43 a.m., the whisper that invited him in the air grew heavier as he stepped closer. Each step felt like he was sinking into something deep. Something wrong. The door creaked slightly, shifting on its hinges. A whisper drifted from the darkness inside, "Come in, Ryan." Ryan's breath caught in his throat. His own voice. But he wasn't the one who spoke. 2:45 a.m., the living room that wasn't mine. Ryan stepped inside. The floorboards groaned under his weight. The house looked exactly as he remembered. The worn-out couch. The crooked family portrait. The old grandfather clock ticking in the corner. Everything was where it should be. Except there were no pictures of him. The frames on the walls held strangers' faces. People he didn't know. People who were smiling too wide. Ryan's skin prickled. Something was watching him. 2:47 a.m., the sound of footsteps upstairs. A slow creak echoed from above. A footstep. Then another. Ryan's heart slammed against his ribs. He wasn't alone. A shadow moved at the top of the stairs. Not fast. Not trying to hide. Just waiting. Ryan swallowed hard. Who's there? Silence. Then a whisper from the darkness, "Come upstairs, Ryan." His own voice. 2:49 a.m., the bedroom door. Ryan forced himself forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. The doors on either side were wrong. Too tall. Too thin. Slightly open. He didn't look inside. Didn't want to see what was waiting. The last door at the end of the hallway was his. His old bedroom. It was open. And someone was standing inside. Facing the wall. Waiting. Ryan's breath shook. The thing in his room shifted slightly. Then it spoke. "You left me behind, Ryan." 2:51 a.m., the other Ryan. The figure turned. Ryan's stomach lurched. It was him. Not just similar. Identical. Same clothes. Same scars. Same tired eyes. Except the other Ryan's face was empty. Like it had forgotten how to be human. It smiled, but the lips stretched too wide. "It's time to come home." Ryan staggered back. "This isn't real. This isn't real." The other Ryan took a step forward. "You made the wrong choice." Ryan's breath hitched. Because he had heard those words before. 2:53 a.m., the door that led back the house shuddered. The walls groaned. The air grew thick, pressing against his skin, wrapping around him like it didn't want to let go. Ryan spun around. The hallway was gone. The only door left was the one behind the other Ryan. The door that shouldn't exist. A subway door. The train was waiting. Ryan's stomach twisted. The faceless passenger was inside. Watching. Waiting. "Come home, Ryan." The house shook violently. The walls began closing in. Ryan had seconds to choose. 2:55 a.m., the decision. Ryan's entire body screamed at him to run. But where? The house wasn't real. The train wasn't real. So which one was worse? The other Ryan reached out, gripping his wrist. Cold fingers. Not human. Ryan gasped, struggling, his vision blurring. The faceless passenger spoke from the train, "Last chance, Ryan." Ryan clenched his jaw. And then he ripped free. And ran. Into the train. 2:57 a.m., the home that wasn't real. The doors slammed shut behind him. The house collapsed into darkness. Ryan's chest heaved. He turned toward the faceless passenger. It was seated in the same place as always. Silent. Watching. The intercom crackled overhead. His own voice whispered, "Next stop, home." Ryan let out a shaky breath. Because now he wasn't sure what that meant anymore. The station that never closes, episode 12. The stop that shouldn't exist. 2:58 a.m., the train moves again. Ryan collapsed into the seat, chest heaving, hands shaking. The train doors had slammed shut behind him. Outside, his home had disappeared, swallowed by the void. As if it had never existed. His stomach churned. What the hell is happening to me? The faceless passenger sat across from him, unmoving. Ryan's fingers curled around the seat. His voice was hoarse. "Where are we going?" The intercom crackled overhead. His own distorted voice whispered, "Final stop, Ryan." The train lurched forward. Faster than before. Like it had somewhere urgent to be. 3 a.m., the windows that showed nothing. Ryan turned to the train windows. His breath hitched. Nothing was outside. Not tunnels. Not city lights. Not darkness. Just nothing. It was as if the train was floating through a void. The realization sent a chill down his spine. This wasn't a train. It was a prison. And it was taking him somewhere he wasn't supposed to go. 3:02 a.m., the announcement that made no sense. The intercom buzzed again. His voice echoed through the train, approaching, "The first station." Ryan frowned. The first station? That wasn't possible. There was no first station. Only the last. The train shuddered violently. Lights flickered overhead. And suddenly the windows weren't empty anymore. 3:04 a.m., the faces in the glass. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. The windows now reflected people. But not just any people. They were all versions of himself. Some younger. Some older. Some, wrong. Their faces twisted, their mouths moving, but no sound came out. Ryan's pulse pounded. Then, all at once they turned to look at him. 3:06 a.m., the voices that weren't his. The train groaned. A whisper slithered through the air. Soft. Disjointed. "Why did you leave?" Ryan's skin prickled. "Where do you think you're going?" The voices overlapped. "You should never have woken up." Ryan slammed his hands over his ears. "This isn't real. This isn't real." The faceless passenger stood up. And suddenly, the train stopped. 3:08 a.m., the station that shouldn't exist. The doors hissed open. Ryan's stomach twisted. Because outside was a place he recognized. His apartment building. It looked exactly the same. Same flickering street lamp. Same cracked pavement. Same heavy feeling in the air. Like the world itself was holding its breath. Ryan turned to the faceless passenger. His voice was barely a whisper. "This isn't real." The passenger tilted its head. Then, for the first time it spoke. "Then why are you here?" 3:10 a.m., the return. Ryan hesitated. Everything inside him screamed not to step off the train. But something pulled at him. Like a thread unraveling, leading him forward. The faceless passenger stepped aside, gesturing toward the open doors. Ryan swallowed hard. Then he stepped out. And the train vanished. 3:12 a.m., the apartment that wasn't his. Ryan walked toward the building. His footsteps echoed too loudly against the pavement. Everything looked right. But felt wrong. The lights were too dim. The air smelled off. Like something old. Like something that had been waiting. His hands trembled as he reached for the door handle. Then it swung open on its own. 3:14 a.m., the stranger in his home. Ryan stepped inside. The air felt heavy. The apartment looked just like he left it. Except there was someone sitting on his couch. Ryan's blood ran cold. The man looked identical to him. Same clothes. Same scars. Same eyes. But the other. Ryan smiled. And it was the wrong kind of smile. Took you long enough. 3:16 a.m., the doppelganger's offer. Ryan froze. His double leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, watching him like a predator sizing up prey. "You shouldn't be here." Ryan's voice came out shaky. "Neither should you." The other. Ryan chuckled. Low. Hollow. "That's where you're wrong." His smile widened. "I never left." Ryan's stomach twisted. He took a slow step back. "You're not real." The other. Ryan's eyes darkened. "Then why do you feel like you are?" 3:18 a.m., the breaking point. The room shifted. The walls twisted. The air thickened. Ryan's head pounded. The other Ryan stood up slowly. You need to go back. Ryan clenched his fists. Back where? The other Ryan tilted his head. Where you belong. Ryan turned toward the door. And his heart stopped. Because standing there was the faceless passenger. Waiting. 3:20 a.m., the final choice. Ryan's breath came in ragged gasps. The intercom voice whispered inside his mind, "This is your last stop, Ryan." The doppelganger's grin widened. The faceless passenger remained still. Ryan had to choose. Stay. Or leave. The walls began closing in. His head spun. His vision blurred. And then he made his choice. And the world went black. The Station That Never Closes, Episode 13. The Passenger Who Took My Place. 3:21 a.m., the standstill. Ryan's body tensed as his eyes darted between the faceless passenger standing at the door and the doppelganger seated on his couch. This wasn't his home. It looked like his apartment, but the air was too thick, too still. Like the walls themselves were listening. The faceless passenger remained silent, its head slightly tilted. The other Ryan, however, let out a low chuckle. You don't even remember, do you? Ryan swallowed hard. Remember what? The doppelganger leaned forward, fingers tapping rhythmically against his knee. You left. And I stayed. Ryan's stomach twisted. That's not true. The smile on the other Ryan's face widened, stretching too far. Then why does it feel like you're the intruder? 3:23 a.m., the broken reflection. Ryan took a step back, heart hammering in his chest. This is another trick. But then he saw it, the mirror on the wall. His breath caught. Because his reflection wasn't there. Only the doppelganger's. And when Ryan turned his head to check, the doppelganger was still staring at him. Smiling. 3:25 a.m., the passenger speaks. A low hum vibrated through the walls. The faceless passenger shifted slightly, its head tilting toward Ryan. Then it spoke. Its voice was wrong. It sounded like dozens of voices overlapping, whispering all at once. Ryan. You made the wrong choice. Ryan clenched his fists. What does that mean? The doppelganger stood up slowly. And the apartment shook. 3:27 a.m., the cracks in reality. The floor rippled. The ceiling groaned. The entire apartment wasn't real. It was a shell. A trap. Ryan's head throbbed, a memory clawing its way to the surface. The train. The stations. The moment he left. The faceless passenger took a step forward. You were never supposed to leave. Ryan's breath came in shallow gasps. Then what am I supposed to do? The doppelganger grinned wider. You already know. And then the apartment shattered. 3:30 a.m., the return to the train. Ryan's vision blurred as the world collapsed around him. The walls peeled away like paper. The floor dissolved into blackness. He was falling. Falling until he landed hard on something metal. Ryan gasped for air, blinking rapidly. He was back. On the train. The same dim lighting. The same empty seats. The same passenger watching him. 3:32 a.m., the choice that never was. The faceless passenger sat across from him again, perfectly still. Ryan's hands shook. Why does this keep happening? The intercom crackled overhead. His own voice whispered, You never left. Ryan's chest tightened. That's not true. The faceless passenger finally moved. It lifted a hand. And placed something on the seat beside Ryan. A ticket. Ryan's heart nearly stopped. Because it didn't say return. It said stay. 3:35 a.m., the truth that hurts. Ryan froze. His entire body screamed at him to run, to get off this train, to wake up, but something inside him whispered the truth. A truth he had been trying to ignore. He had never made it out. The station. The apartment. The streets that looked real but weren't, they were all part of the train. Ryan had been chasing a way out that didn't exist. The faceless passenger tilted its head slightly. Then, in a quiet, almost gentle voice, it spoke. "This is home now." Ryan's stomach twisted. His fingers tightened around the ticket. The train lurched forward. And the intercom whispered, "Final stop approaching." 3:37 a.m., the reflection that took his place. Ryan's breathing came fast and shallow. He turned to the window beside him. And nearly screamed. Because his reflection was there. But it wasn't him. It was the doppelganger. Grinning. Watching. From the other side of the glass. Ryan's blood ran cold. The doppelganger slowly raised a hand. And placed it against the window. Then, in a voice that shouldn't have been possible, it spoke, "I got out, Ryan." Ryan's vision blurred. "No," the intercom buzzed. "Final stop." The train slowed. The door slid open. Ryan turned his head toward the station. His legs wouldn't move. Because standing outside the train was himself. Smiling. Waiting. 3:40 a.m., the last stop. Ryan shook his head. This isn't real. But the other Ryan was already stepping back, vanishing into the crowd outside the train. Living a life that should have been his. Ryan lunged forward, but the door slammed shut. The train began to move. The intercom crackled one last time. A whisper drifted through the air, fading into the distance, "You should have stayed." Ryan sank into the seat, hands trembling. He was trapped. And this time there was no way out. The station that never closes, episode 14. The train that never stops. 3:41 a.m., the realization. Ryan sat frozen in his seat, staring out the window as his doppelganger disappeared into the world outside. The doors had closed. The train had moved on. And he was still here. A silent scream built in his throat, but no sound escaped. His body felt heavy, like he was sinking deeper into the seat, into the very fabric of the train itself. This can't be happening. He pressed his hands against the glass, watching his other self walk away, blending into the crowd of a station that shouldn't exist. And then the station vanished. Swallowed whole by the void. The train kept moving. Ryan's fingers curled into fists. "Let me off." The faceless passenger sitting across from him didn't move. Didn't react. The intercom crackled overhead. His own voice whispered, "Final stop missed." Continuing route. Ryan's blood turned to ice. "What do you mean, missed?" He turned sharply to the faceless passenger, his voice raw. "Where are we going?" For the first time, it moved. Its smooth, featureless head tilted slightly. And then it said something Ryan wasn't ready to hear. "Nowhere." 3:43 a.m., the infinite tracks. Ryan jumped to his feet, his breath coming fast and uneven. No. No, I got on this train to leave. There has to be another stop." He turned toward the doors, pressing his hands against them. They didn't budge. Through the windows, there was nothing. No tunnels. No lights. No stations. Just an endless stretch of track leading into blackness. The faceless passenger shifted again. Its hollow voice whispered, "There were never any stops." Ryan stumbled back. His head pounded. His heartbeat roared in his ears. "That's not true. That's not true." The train shuddered beneath him. And then the lights flickered. 3:45 a.m., the doors that opened on their own. A chime echoed through the train. Soft. Hollow. The door slid open. But outside. There was no platform. Only void. Deep, infinite darkness, stretching endlessly in every direction. Ryan's breath hitched. He could feel it. Something was out there. Watching. Waiting. The faceless passenger spoke again. "Step through, Ryan." Ryan took a shaky step back. "No," the intercom crackled, his own voice whispering, "It's the only way out." 3:47 a.m., the whispers in the dark, the air shifted. A low hum vibrated through the open doorway. A whisper slithered through the darkness, curling around him like smoke. Soft. Familiar. Ryan, his breath caught in his throat. That voice. It was his mother. She had been dead for years. Ryan's entire body trembled. "Mom." The whisper came again. "Come home, Ryan." 3:49 a.m., the choice that wasn't a choice. Ryan's knees buckled. Tears burned in his eyes. His chest ached with something deeper than fear, desperation. The void wasn't empty. It was full of voices. Familiar. Soft. Calling his name. "Come back, Ryan. We miss you. You don't belong here." The faceless passenger stood slowly, its presence looming over him. "Step through." Ryan's fingers dug into his palms. His vision blurred. "If I step through, will I finally be free? Or is this just another trap?" The darkness outside twisted. Something moved in the void. Something huge. Something waiting. Ryan's breathing turned ragged. His hands trembled. Then he stepped forward. And into the dark. 3:51 a.m., the fall. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the ground vanished beneath him. He fell. Endlessly. The whispers grew louder. "You shouldn't have left. You made the wrong choice. You were supposed to stay." Ryan's mind reeled. His body twisted in the void, weightless, lost, sinking deeper and deeper. And then he hit the ground. 3:53 a.m., the station that shouldn't exist. Ryan gasped for air, his lungs burning. He pushed himself up, his palms scraping against something cold. Concrete. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. His stomach dropped. He knew this place. A train station. But not just any station. The first station. The one he had boarded the train from in the beginning. Ryan's pulse roared. No. No, no, no. Footsteps echoed behind him. Slow. Measured. He turned. And there it was. The train. Waiting. The doors open. And standing inside was the faceless passenger. Waiting. Again. 3:55 a.m., the loop. Ryan staggered back. This isn't real. The faceless passenger didn't respond. The intercom buzzed. Ryan's own voice whispered, "All passengers, please board." Ryan's chest ached. Tears blurred his vision. "I can't be back here. I can't." The doors remained open. The faceless passenger tilted its head slightly. "You never left." Ryan's breath caught in his throat. His vision spun. It was a loop. It had always been a loop. And then the lights flickered. The train whistle screamed. The world went dark. The station that never closes, episode 15. The stop that never came. 3:56 a.m., the beginning that wasn't. Ryan's knees buckled as he stared at the train station that shouldn't exist. He had been here before. The cracked tiles, the buzzing overhead lights, the stale scent of something long abandoned. The station where he had first boarded the train. His breath came in shallow, uneven gasps. "No, I got out. I left." But the train was waiting. Its doors open. And inside, the faceless passenger sat, motionless. Watching. Waiting. The intercom crackled. His own voice whispered, "Final stop approaching." Ryan staggered back. "What final stop? I've already been through this." The faceless passenger tilted its head slightly. Then, in a voice as hollow as the void outside, it spoke, "Then why are you still here?" 3:58 a.m., The passengers that weren't there. Ryan spun, searching the empty station for another way out. But there was no exit. No doors leading to the streets. No staircases. Just the train. And then, from the flickering shadows, something moved. At first, he thought they were people. Figures emerging from the darkness. But as they drew closer, Ryan's stomach twisted. They weren't people. They were versions of himself. Some young. Some old. Some barely recognizable, their bodies twisted and wrong. But they all had the same face. His. And they all spoke at once. You should have stayed. 4 a.m., the train moves without him. The train doors began to close. Ryan's pulse roared. Instinct screamed at him to run. To get back on. But his feet wouldn't move. He watched helpless as the train lurched forward, pulling away from the platform. The faceless passenger sat inside, staring at him until the darkness swallowed it whole. Ryan's chest tightened. The train was leaving without me. What does that mean? And then the voices laughed. 4:02 a.m., the world that unraveled. The station shuddered. The walls rippled like water. Ryan staggered, gripping the nearest pillar for balance, but the concrete felt wrong. Like it wasn't solid anymore. The lights flickered wildly. One by one, the bulbs burst, shattering above him. The air grew thick. Suffocating. The other Ryans began to dissolve, their forms melting into the walls. And then, as the last light flickered out, the floor beneath him collapsed. And he was falling. 4:04 a.m., the endless descent. Ryan tumbled through a void of shifting shapes and distorted whispers. The station was gone. The train was gone. The only thing left was the sensation of falling. Falling through layers of places he had been before. His childhood bedroom. The hospital room where he had woken up. The faceless street that pretended to be his home. They flickered past him like pages of a book being torn apart. Ryan squeezed his eyes shut. Wake up. Wake up. A voice whispered back. You are awake. Ryan's breath hitched. And suddenly he landed. 4:06 a.m., the station that changed. Ryan gasped, lungs burning. He was back in the station. But it wasn't the same. The walls were covered in cracks. The ceiling had no end. And at the far end of the platform a new train was waiting. This one was different. The doors were open. Inside, there were passengers. All of them faceless. Ryan swallowed hard. Where does this one go? The intercom crackled. And this time the voice wasn't his. It was the faceless passenger. The last stop. 4:08 a.m., the last question Ryan's mind raced. If I get on, will I finally be free? Or is this just another trap? His feet remained planted to the ground. The faceless passenger stood at the entrance, waiting. Ryan's fists clenched at his sides. What happens if I don't get on? The faceless passenger's head tilted slightly. Then it spoke 3 words that sent ice through Ryan's veins, then you stay. Ryan's breath hitched. The walls of the station shuddered. The ground beneath him cracked. The faceless figures inside the train turned their heads in unison. Watching. Waiting. The train whistle screamed. Ryan had seconds to decide. And then he took a step forward. 4:10 a.m., the doors that closed too soon. Ryan lunged for the train. But as he did, the doors slammed shut. The train began to move. Ryan's heart stopped. No. He pounded against the metal, watching helplessly as it pulled away. The faceless passenger stood inside, staring at him as the train disappeared into the dark. Ryan staggered back, chest heaving. The station shook violently. The intercom crackled. A whisper, softer this time, you made the wrong choice. Ryan's knees buckled. His vision blurred. The station collapsed. And then everything went black. The Station That Never Closes, Episode 16. The train that left me behind. 4:11 a.m. The silence that followed Ryan collapsed onto the cold platform, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The train was gone. The last chance he had to escape had left without him. The station was empty. No announcements. No footsteps. No distant hum of an approaching train. Only silence. Ryan pressed his hands to his head, panic crawling up his spine. What happens now? He looked up. The overhead lights flickered. Then they went out. And the darkness swallowed him whole. 4:13 a.m., the platform that changed Ryan's heartbeat pounded in his ears as he scrambled to his feet. The station wasn't the same anymore. The tiled floor was cracked, covered in a thick layer of dust. The walls shifted. They stretched further, the platform expanding into an endless corridor, filled with doors that hadn't been there before. All of them slightly open. And from inside came whispers. Soft. Indistinct. Ryan swallowed hard. Then, a single word slipped from the darkness, "Come in." 4:15 a.m., the first door. Ryan stepped toward the nearest door. It was old, the wood warped, a dull yellow light flickering from within. His fingers trembled as he pushed it open. And what he saw inside made his blood run cold. It was his childhood bedroom. Exactly as he remembered it. The posters on the wall. The small twin bed. The night light glowing dimly in the corner. And sitting on the bed was himself. A younger version of him. Eyes wide. Face pale. The boy's lips moved. "You're not supposed to be here." 4:17 a.m., the fractured past. Ryan's breath came in short, sharp gasps. This isn't real. The younger version of him blinked slowly. Then he reached under the bed. Ryan's stomach clenched. The boy pulled something out. A small, rusted train ticket. Ryan's mouth went dry. The boy held it up, his fingers trembling. "You left me behind." Ryan took a slow step back. The shadows in the room deepened. The whispers grew louder. And then the boy's face began to change. 4:19 a.m., the wrong reflection. Ryan's younger self twitched. His face contorted, stretching, twisting, becoming something else. Something wrong. The boy stood up, his movements jerky and unnatural. His voice was layered now, overlapping. "You left me behind." Ryan stumbled out of the room, slamming the door shut. His breath hitched. The whispers behind the door didn't stop. They only grew louder. He had to get out of here. He turned and the station had changed again. 4:21 a.m., the hallway that led nowhere. The platform was gone. In its place was a long, endless hallway. Lined with mirrors. Ryan's pulse pounded. He took a cautious step forward. His reflection moved with him. Until it didn't. Ryan froze. The reflection of him stood still. Then, slowly it smiled. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. No, the reflection lifted a hand. And knocked against the glass. Once. Twice. Then the mirror shattered. 4:23 a.m., the passenger who came back. The air crackled. The fragments of the broken mirror shifted, rearranged. Forming into something else. A shape Ryan recognized immediately. The faceless passenger. Standing in front of him. Closer than ever before. Ryan's stomach twisted. "It followed me." The faceless figure lifted its head slightly. And this time, it spoke in his own voice. "You weren't supposed to leave." Ryan's entire body went cold. The whispers swirled around him, the walls of the hallway closing in. The air grew heavy. He had nowhere to run. Then the faceless passenger lifted its hand. And pointed. Behind him. To a door he hadn't noticed before. It was wide open. And on the other side was the train. 4:25 a.m., the return. Ryan's breath came in short, panicked bursts. The train was waiting. Its doors open. The faceless passenger took a step forward and whispered, "Get back on." Ryan's pulse pounded. The train rumbled softly, waiting. He had been here before. Hadn't he? He had a choice. Stay here or board the train again. The faceless passenger stood perfectly still, waiting. The whispers grew louder. Ryan took a step forward, then another, and then he stepped onto the train. 4:27 a.m., the doors that never closed. The train shuddered beneath him. The doors remained open. The faceless passenger followed, taking its usual seat across from him. Ryan's fingers dug into the seat. His breath was unsteady. The intercom crackled overhead. And for the first time it wasn't his voice. It was someone else's. A voice that was eerily familiar. Resuming route. The train lurched forward. And Ryan realized he had never escaped. The station, the reflections, the whispers, it had all been a loop. And now, the train was moving again. Toward a stop that didn't exist. Ryan's hands trembled. The faceless passenger sat in silence. Watching. Waiting. The train kept going. And this time Ryan wasn't sure if it would ever stop. The station that never closes, episode 17. The train that was always moving. 4:28 a.m., the route that never ends. The train shuddered forward. Ryan sat still, his breath slow, controlled. He was back. Back in the same seat. The faceless passenger sat across from him. Watching. Waiting. Ryan clenched his fists. This isn't real. It's a loop. I can break it. The intercom crackled. His own distorted voice whispered, "Next stop, the end of the line." Ryan's stomach twisted. There's never been an end before. So why now? 4:30 a.m., the windows that showed something new. Ryan turned to the windows. For the first time, there was something outside. Not darkness. Not endless void. But a city. A familiar one. His city. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. The skyline stretched endlessly, buildings illuminated by neon signs flickering in the night. The streets were empty. No people. No movement. Just silence. The train rumbled on. And then he saw himself. Standing at the next station. Waiting. 4:32 a.m., the man at the platform. Ryan's pulse pounded in his ears. He pressed his hands against the window, staring at the figure outside. It was him. Not a doppelganger. Not a reflection. Just him. The other. Ryan met his gaze. And smiled. The train began to slow. The doors hissed open. Ryan's entire body tensed. The other him didn't move. Didn't step forward. Just stood there. Watching. The faceless passenger remained still across from him. Waiting. The intercom buzzed. Boarding complete. The train began to move again. Ryan staggered to his feet. No, wait. The door slammed shut. The other him remained on the platform, watching as the train pulled away. And then the station vanished. 4:34 a.m., the truth that didn't make sense. Ryan turned sharply to the faceless passenger. His voice was hoarse, desperate. Who was that? The faceless figure tilted its head. The intercom crackled. This time, it wasn't his voice. That was the real you. Ryan's blood ran cold. The real me? He turned back to the window, hands shaking. The city was still outside. Still empty. But now, something else was there. A reflection in the glass. Not his. Not the faceless passenger's. But the other Ryan. And he was inside the train. Smiling. 4:36 a.m., the reflection that shouldn't exist. Ryan's breath hitched. He turned slowly, but no one was there. Only the faceless passenger. The intercom buzzed again. Approaching, the last station. Ryan's pulse pounded. This time, the train is stopping. This time, I can get off. But something felt wrong. The last time the train had stopped, he had been left behind. What if this time he wasn't the one getting off? 4:38 a.m., the passenger who moved first. The train slowed. Ryan's hands clenched. The faceless passenger shifted. For the first time, it stood up. Ryan's stomach twisted. The door slid open. A new station stretched out before him. Not a station at all. A house. His house. Dimly lit. Familiar. But not right. Ryan turned to the faceless passenger. What is this? The figure stood perfectly still. Then it whispered, home. 4:40 a.m., the choice that wasn't a choice. The air felt thick. Ryan's entire body screamed at him not to move. But the faceless passenger stepped forward. Heading toward the open doors. Toward his home. It's getting off. Ryan's chest tightened. His breath came in ragged gasps. If the faceless passenger was leaving, who would take its place? The train rumbled beneath his feet. Ryan's vision blurred. The faceless passenger reached the door. And then it turned its head toward him. Just slightly. Then it stepped off the train. And Ryan's entire world shifted. 4:42 a.m., the passenger that was him. The door slammed shut. Ryan lunged forward, but it was too late. The train shuddered. Then it began to move. Ryan's heart pounded. No. Let me off. He slammed his fists against the doors. Through the window, he saw the faceless passenger standing outside. Looking in. Standing in front of his house. Taking his place. Ryan felt it immediately. Something was wrong. His limbs felt heavy. His breath slowed. And then he turned. And saw his reflection in the window. It wasn't him anymore. It was the faceless passenger. Watching. Waiting. Ryan's throat tightened. The intercom crackled. His own voice whispered, "You never left." And then the train kept moving. And Ryan knew it was never going to stop again. The station that never closes, episode 18. The passenger that became me. 4:43 a.m., the train that didn't stop. Ryan's breath was ragged. His fists were pressed against the glass, eyes locked onto the faceless passenger standing outside. It had taken his place. He wasn't outside. He wasn't free. He was still on the train. And now, he was the one inside. The doors had slammed shut before he could react. The train had moved on. And for the first time, Ryan understood. This was never about getting off. It was about who stayed on. The intercom crackled overhead. His own voice whispered, "You were always meant to stay." Ryan stumbled back, heart hammering in his chest. No. No, no, no. He turned sharply. The seat across from him was empty. The faceless passenger was gone. And yet Ryan felt something. A presence. An invisible weight settling over him. Like the role was shifting. Like the seat was waiting for him. 4:45 a.m., the reflection that watched back. Ryan turned slowly to the train window. His stomach twisted. His reflection was still there. But something was wrong. The features were softening. Losing definition. The edges of his face blurred, melting into the glass. Ryan's breath hitched. His reflection blinked. But Ryan hadn't moved. The intercom crackled again. "This is home now." Ryan whirled around. The train car was empty. He was alone. But the reflection remained. Watching. Smiling. 4:47 a.m., the passengers that never left. Ryan's heartbeat was deafening in his ears. He stumbled down the train car, gripping the cold metal poles for balance. There has to be a way out. The next car was silent. Row after row of empty seats. Or so he thought. Then the lights flickered. And suddenly the seats weren't empty anymore. Passengers. Row after row of faceless passengers. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. They weren't moving. Weren't looking at him. Just sitting. Waiting. Ryan took a slow step forward. The air felt heavy, pressing against his chest. Then one of the passengers turned its head. 4:49 a.m., the whisper that called his name. Ryan's pulse roared. The faceless passenger's head tilted slightly, as if listening. Then, in a voice too familiar to be real, it whispered, "Ryan." Ryan's hands clenched into fists. "Who are you?" The passenger's featureless face stared back. Then, in the same hollow whisper, it said, "You." Ryan took a shaky step back. "No. That's not possible." The passenger stood up. And Ryan ran. 4:51 a.m., the doors that led nowhere. Ryan's breath burned in his lungs as he sprinted toward the next car. The doors slid open. He lunged through. And the doors slammed shut behind him. Ryan whirled around, hands slamming against the metal. Through the window, he saw the faceless passenger standing there. Still. Silent. Watching. The intercom crackled overhead. His own voice whispered, "You're almost ready." Ryan's blood ran cold. 4:53 a.m., the seat that called to him, the train car, was empty again. Ryan turned slowly, breathing hard. And then he saw it. His seat. The same one he had always sat in. And on the cushion, waiting for him, was a single, rusted train ticket. Ryan's vision blurred. He took a step forward, then stopped himself. This is a trick. This is how it keeps me here. The train rumbled beneath him. The intercom whispered, "Final stop approaching." Ryan's fists tightened. "No," the faceless passenger's voice whispered in his mind. "You've already taken my place." Ryan clenched his jaw. "No, I haven't." And then the train slowed. 4:55 a.m., the station that shouldn't exist. The doors hissed open. Ryan took a slow, unsteady breath. Outside, the station stretched before him. But it wasn't a station. It was nothing. A vast, empty void. Ryan's breath hitched. There's nowhere to go. This is it. The faceless passenger spoke one last time. All aboard. Ryan squeezed his eyes shut. Think. There has to be a way out. The intercom crackled one last time. You can still get off. Ryan's heart slammed against his ribs. And then he made his choice. He jumped. Into the dark. 4:57 a.m., the fall that never ended. Ryan fell. And fell. And fell. The train disappeared above him. The faceless passenger faded into the void. Ryan's breath came in sharp, broken gasps. Then a distant sound. The screech of brakes. A train whistle. Ryan's pulse roared. And then he hit the ground. 4:59 a.m., the station that changed. Ryan gasped for air, blinking rapidly. He was back. In the station. But something was different. The lights flickered overhead. The train sat motionless in front of him. And then the doors opened. Inside, the train was empty. Except for one seat. His seat. Waiting. The intercom crackled. And his own voice whispered, "Final call." Ryan's hands trembled. Because now he wasn't sure if he had ever gotten off. The Station That Never Closes, Episode 19. The Loop That Wouldn't Break. 5 a.m., the station that started it all. Ryan gasped for air, his vision swimming as he pushed himself up from the cold tiled floor. The station. He was back in the station. Back where it had all started. The lights flickered overhead, buzzing softly like dying fireflies. The train stood in front of him, its doors open, waiting. The station that never closes, episode 19. The loop that wouldn't break. 5 a.m., the station that started it all. Ryan gasped for air, his vision swimming as he pushed himself up from the cold tiled floor. The station. He was back in the station. Back where it had all started. The lights flickered overhead, buzzing softly like dying fireflies. The train stood in front of him, its doors open, waiting. Just like before. Ryan's stomach twisted into a tight knot. This can't be happening. This was supposed to be over. The intercom crackled, and his own voice whispered, "All passengers, please board." Ryan clenched his fists. No, he wasn't doing this again. He turned away from the train and froze. Because standing behind him was himself. 5:02 a.m., the other Ryan's breath caught in his throat. The other him stood perfectly still, his face eerily calm. Not smiling. Not threatening. Just watching. Ryan took a step back, his pulse hammering in his ears. "What are you?" The other Ryan tilted his head slightly. Then he spoke. His voice was exactly the same as Ryan's. "I'm the one who got out." Ryan's stomach dropped. "That's not possible." The other Ryan smiled faintly. "Then why are you still here?" 5:04 a.m., the truth that hurt. Ryan's hands curled into fists. "This is just another trick." But the other Ryan shook his head. "You don't get it, do you?" He gestured to the train. "You never left." Ryan's heart pounded. "That's not true. I jumped. I escaped." But deep down, he felt it. Something fractured. A memory, distant but real. The train doors slamming shut. The faceless passenger stepping outside. Taking his place. Ryan had never left. The real him had. 5:06 a.m., the wrong passenger. Ryan shook his head violently. "No. That's not possible." The other Ryan simply stared. And then the station shook. The walls flickered, rippled like water. Ryan stumbled, gripping a rusted railing to keep his balance. The train whistle screamed. The intercom crackled overhead, "Final boarding call." The other Ryan took a slow step forward. "You don't have a choice." Ryan's chest tightened. "There's always a choice. Isn't there?" 5:08 a.m., the doors that wouldn't stay closed. Ryan turned back toward the train. The doors were still open. The faceless passenger seat was still empty. Waiting. Ryan's hands trembled. He had spent so long trying to get off this train. But now it felt like he was being pushed back on. The other Ryan took another step closer. "There's only room for one of us." Ryan's breath came fast and sharp. The walls shuddered. The ground beneath him cracked. The station was falling apart. And then the lights went out. 5:10 a.m., the darkness that swallowed everything. For a moment, there was nothing. No train. No station. Just an endless black void. Ryan's heart raced. He reached out blindly and his fingers brushed something cold. Metal. A seed. His seed. And then a voice whispered in his ear. "Sit down, Ryan." Ryan's pulse roared. The intercom buzzed. "All aboard." 5:12 a.m., the passenger that couldn't leave Ryan's vision swam as the darkness peeled away. And suddenly he was back on the train. Seated. His fingers gripped the cold metal armrest. The faceless passenger was across from him. Except, it wasn't faceless anymore. It had a face. His face. The intercom whispered, "Departure confirmed." Ryan's chest tightened. He looked down. A ticket rested on his lap. Stamped in bold, rusted letters, "Stay." Ryan's throat went dry. His own voice whispered back, "You never left." The train shuddered. The world outside flickered. And Ryan realized he wasn't getting off. Not this time. Not ever. The Station That Never Closes, Episode 20, Final, The Stop That Never Came. 5:15 a.m., The Passenger That Became Me. Ryan sat frozen, his breath coming in shallow gasps as the train rumbled beneath him. The faceless passenger across from him was no longer faceless. It had his face, his eyes, his lips, his expression. But it wasn't him. Ryan's fingers trembled as he looked down. The rusted ticket sat in his lap, its bold letters etched deep into the paper, "Stay." The intercom crackled overhead. And his own voice whispered, "You made your choice." Ryan shook his head violently. No. No, this isn't real. But the train kept moving. And deep down, he knew. It was real. It had always been real. 5:17 a.m., the last passenger. Ryan's breath hitched as he looked out the window. The city was gone. The tracks stretched into an endless void, pulsing with shadows that slithered and twisted in the dark. There was no station. No stop ahead. The train wasn't going anywhere. It never had. Ryan clenched his fists. There has to be a way out. There has to be. He turned to his doppelganger. The other him sat perfectly still. Watching. Waiting. And then, in Ryan's exact voice, it whispered, "You were always meant to take my place." Ryan's blood ran cold. "You're lying." The doppelganger smiled. "Am I?" 5:19 a.m., the doors that wouldn't open. Ryan lunged for the train doors. He slammed his fists against them, desperate. "Let me off." Nothing. No movement. No release. The doppelganger didn't move. Didn't react. The intercom buzzed. Final stop approaching. Ryan's pulse pounded. The train had never had a final stop before. So why now? 5:21 a.m., the reflection that didn't belong. Ryan turned sharply to the window. His reflection stared back at him. But it wasn't his. It was the faceless passenger. Its featureless head tilted slightly. Then, slowly it raised its hand. And pressed it against the glass. Ryan's heart stopped. Because his own hand moved too. But he hadn't moved it. His reflection had moved first. And Ryan had only followed. The intercom crackled again. Final stop in 1 minute. Ryan's breath came in ragged gasps. This isn't real. This isn't real. The doppelganger stood up. And whispered, "It's time." 5:23 a.m., the last choice. Ryan staggered back. The train shuddered violently. The walls rippled, shifting like liquid. Ryan turned sharply. The doors were opening. But outside there was nothing. No station. No streets. Just endless, twisting darkness. The void stared back at him. Waiting. The intercom whispered, "All passengers, disembark." Ryan's vision blurred. The doppelganger took a step forward. Toward the doors. Ryan's entire body screamed not to move. But something inside him whispered the truth. He had never been in control. Not really. The doppelganger turned its head, smiling faintly. "I'll see you soon." And then it stepped through the doors. And into the dark. 5:25 a.m., the new passenger. Ryan stood frozen as the doors slammed shut. The train lurched forward. The intercom crackled for the last time. "Thank you for your journey." Ryan turned slowly. And saw his seat. Empty. Waiting. And on the cushion a single, rusted ticket. Stamped in bold, deep letters, "Ride again." Ryan's vision blurred. His knees buckled. The train rumbled on, stretching into eternity. And Ryan took his seat. His breath steady. His hands still. The intercom whispered one final time, "The station never closes." And the train kept going.